For decades, storytellers have claimed an axe-wielding Bunnyman has terrorized Northern Virginia, but the truth might be stranger than fiction. This is Morella Bell, and you're listening to the Secret Virginia podcast, where we explore the hidden mysteries of the Old Dominion and its neighbors. Visit us at secretvirginia.com and on social media at Secret Virginia. The year was 1904. A bus carrying inmates from the county asylum swerved along darkened country backroads towards Lorton Prison. One of the buses took a sharp turn and crashed in a particularly remote area, killing all but 10 patients. Most were recaptured, except for Douglas J. Griffin, convicted of murdering his family on Easter. Since then, the carcasses of helpless teenagers and bunnies alike have been found hanging from a nearby bridge, slain at the hands of a deranged man wearing a rabbit-eared costume. This axe-wielding bunny man has reportedly appeared to startle the onlookers as far away as Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Culpeper, Virginia. But if he has a home, it's in rural Fairfax County, Virginia, near an old railroad bridge over Colchester Road. The bridge, variously known as Fairfax Station Bridge or Colchester Overpass, has become known as Bunnyman Bridge in popular imagination. It's even labeled as such on Google Maps. A remote, creepy bridge used during the 1950s and 60s as a makeout spot is like a magnet for urban legends and folklore, and Bunnyman Bridge is no exception. Though variations of common legends have taken root here, Bunnyman Bridge is unique in that at least part of the legend is based on real events. According to Fairfax County archivist Brian Conley, there were a series of documented encounters with an axe-wielding man dressed in a bunny suit around Fairfax in 1970, and the fact these encounters took place in late October probably added fuel to the fire. The original sighting on the 5400 block of Guinea Road was approximately 6 miles east of the Fairfax Station Bridge. An enraged man threw a hatchet through the car window of a young couple parked along the side of the road. Every other element, murdered teens, a bus crash, escaped asylum patients, and even discarded bunny carcasses are all fiction, and the author of the earliest version of the tale to appear online left clues for careful readers. Fairfax Station Bridge wasn't built until 1906. Lorton Prison didn't open until 1910, and there was never an insane asylum in Fairfax County. At least, not that I can recall. I know from personal experience that inmates would be transported by horse-drawn wagons in 1906, not motorized buses. Folklorists will tell you the story of a passenger bus crashing near a bridge is a migrating legend, one that retains a basic storyline but moves around from place to place. The tale has even shown up in Illinois, this one involving a clown and a bus full of special needs students near a bridge along Blood's Point Road. The original Bunnyman legend was far less gruesome but was embellished over time, attracting common elements from other urban legends. Of 54 variations on the story recorded by University of Maryland student Patricia Johnson in 1973, only 3 mentioned a murder. Nevertheless, Bunnyman Bridge has captured the public's imagination, especially after it was featured on Season 2, Episode 1 of Fox Family's Scariest Places on Earth in 2001. The legend was even adapted into an indie horror film in 2011, and hundreds of visitors attempt to see the bridge around Halloween each year. Police have actively turned them away. Recently, fictional horror set the stage for real-life tragedy. In April 2018, a 30-year-old man was found dead approximately 900 feet from the bridge. 3 men were later indicted for his murder, stemming from a marijuana trafficking dispute. The victim's alleged killer drove him to this remote section of woods and shot him in the chest. Was this dead-end road near Bunnyman Bridge just a convenient spot for murder, or did the killer choose it because of its sinister reputation? While the real Bunnyman put away his hatchet decades ago, the legend he spawned has taken on a life of its own, and its popularity doesn't seem to be abating. If you're ever in this remote section of Northern Virginia, don't linger for long. Once again, this is Morella Bell, and you're listening to the Secret Virginia Podcast. A colonial-era home sits on a quiet plaza in America's most historic town, but storytellers say something sinister lurks inside. Without the misfortune of dying right before the Declaration of Independence in 1775, Peyton Randolph would be considered one of our country's most prominent founding fathers. He was elected president of the First and Second Continental Congress before dying of a stroke while dining with Thomas Jefferson. His home, expanded and modified over the intervening decades, still stands in Colonial Williamsburg. The Georgian-style house, at least the western wing at the corner of Nicholson and North England Streets, was built in 1715 by William Robertson. Sir John Randolph, Peyton's father, purchased it in 1721 and willed it to his son, who took ownership at the age of 24. He was a handsome young man, as I can recollect, and a fabulous dancer. John had built a second house, what became the East Wing, in 1724, and Peyton connected the two homes with a spacious hall through the East Wing, though the East Wing still had to be accessed from outside. Peyton's sister, Susanna Beverly, lived in the home until her death circa 1754, and Peyton's widow retained it after his death. It served as a temporary headquarters to French General de Rochambeau during the Siege of Yorktown in 1781. It was sold at auction in 1783 and served as a military hospital at the Battle of Williamsburg on May 5, 1862, during the American Civil War. Oh, the suffering of those boys is something I pray to never see again. By the early 1900s, the historic house had fallen into disrepair, so during restoration in 1939, the East Wing had to be torn down and reconstructed. The house was designated a National Historic Landmark and added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1970. It opened for tours in 1968. It's not every day you can walk the same floors as one of our country's founding fathers. The Peyton Randolph House retained its original pine floors, walnut paneling, and brass hinges and locks, but some visitors insist it retains something immaterial as well. It's been called the most haunted house in America, possibly the most haunted on the East Coast, and certainly the most haunted in Virginia, but no one is quite sure why. Is it cursed by a slave woman named Eve, or haunted by the agonized souls of Betty Randolph's other slaves? Do the ghosts of two children who died at the home play in its halls? Or how about Civil War soldiers who succumbed to their wounds? Or is it because American Indian graves were disturbed during the building of the Colonial National Historic Parkway Tunnel? Any of these explanations is enough to satiate the curiosity of believers. The hauntings at Peyton Randolph House date back to its earliest days. Famed French General Marquis de Lafayette, who helped win the battle against Lord Cornwallis at Yorktown, stayed there during his 1824 tour and reportedly described feeling a phantom hand on his shoulder and being awoken by disembodied voices during the night. According to Colonial Williamsburg Hauntings, the official Colonial Williamsburg Ghost Walk companion, the The most active phantoms in Peyton Randolph House are those of the Peachy children, Sally and Mary. T.G. Peachy owned the house after the Randolphs, and he and his family are buried somewhere on the grounds. One security guard reportedly heard the laughter of children and the sound of tiny feet running across the floor as he locked up for the night. Others have seen the apparition of a child in an upstairs window. In one disturbing incident, another security guard found himself locked in the basement while making his rounds. He felt something grab his leg and hold fast, not releasing him until he radioed for backup. While there is no evidence Peyton Randolph's wife Elizabeth mistreated their slaves, a slave trader named Richard Hansford lived there in the years prior to the Civil War. Could his ghost account for this violent presence? The Peyton Randolph House, 100 West Nicholson Street in Williamsburg, Virginia, is open daily 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Admission to the museum is included with the Colonial Williamsburg ticket, $44.99 for adults and $24.99 for children ages 6 to 12. Tickets get you admission to over a dozen museums throughout Colonial Williamsburg. Or you can book a tour on the official Haunted Williamsburg Ghost Walk, which stops inside the Peyton Randolph House. Tickets for the candlelit walking tour are $19 for adults and $12 for children. Whether or not you believe in ghosts, this historic house museum is one of a kind and well worth a visit. A menagerie of tortured souls is said to lurk in these corridors deep in West Virginia's Allegheny Mountains. Virginia. Designed by Baltimore architect Richard Snowden Andrews in Gothic and Tudor Revival styles, construction on the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum began in 1858. Its main building was laid out according to the Kirkbride Plan, brainchild of Superintendent of the Pennsylvania Hospital for the Insane, Thomas Story Kirkbride. Kirkbride reckoned that exposure to natural light and fresh air would aid in curing the mentally ill, so he designed a long, narrow hospital with staggered wings extending outward from the center. The furthest wings were reserved for the most violent or disturbed patients. In 1861, the Civil War's outbreak interrupted construction on Virginia's new asylum as Union troops seized nearly $30,000 in gold construction funds from a local bank and used them to help fund a pro-Union Virginia government in Wheeling. When West Virginia seceded from Virginia in 1863 and was admitted to the Union, the new state government renamed it the West Virginia Hospital for the Insane. Construction on the sprawling grounds, with everything the hospital needed to be a self-sustaining community, wasn't completed until 1881. Originally designed to accommodate 250 patients in relatively comfortable surroundings with plenty of natural light and fresh air, conditions at the West Virginia Hospital for the Insane slowly deteriorated into a horror show. During the 1950s, its population peaked at a staggering 2,600 patients, with state and medical officials resorting to lobotomy to reduce overcrowding. Lobotomy means to make patients docile by severing connections in the frontal lobe of the brain with a sharp instrument like an ice pick. It's believed over 1,000 lobotomies were performed there. Like many large psychiatric hospitals, Weston State Hospital, as it came to be called, closed in the 1990s. It was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1978, and the Weston Hospital main building was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1990. In 1999, local constables used the abandoned hospital to play something called paintball, and it sat empty for years. Preservation efforts bore fruit in 2007 when a gentleman named Joe Jordan purchased the building for $1.5 million and opened it for tours. An abandoned insane asylum with sprawling wings and rooms bearing reminders of past patients was a natural incubator for ghost stories, and paranormal themed tours were baked into Jordan's business model. Weston State Hospital has appeared in a cornucopia of TV shows, including Travel Channel's Ghost Stories, Paranormal Challenge, and Ghost Adventures, Sci-Fi's Ghost Hunters, and Destination America's Paranormal Lockdown, making it one of the most famous destinations for ghost hunting and dark tourism in America. So what kind of wild chicanery goes on there? According to Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum staff, phantasmagoria includes everything from apparition sightings to explainable voices and sounds. There are the ghosts of a little girl named Lily, men named Jesse and Jim James or Big Jim, Ruth and a nurse named Elizabeth, Civil War soldiers, and a murderer named Slewfoot. Visitors leave coins, cigars, cigarettes, toys, and even liquor, though not officially allowed, at various places around the asylum as offerings to the ghosts. Marissa M. Cascino, writing in the Washingtonian, described a curious incident on her overnight ghost hunt. Julia and I sat up in a room allegedly haunted by a spirit named Jim James, she wrote. We placed a mag light on the floor and asked Jim to turn it on. The light was Julia's, but I inspected it and it seemed totally ordinary. A few beats passed, then it came on by itself. I offered Jim a cigarette to turn it back off. It went dark. The most widely known ghost to allegedly inhabit Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum is that of a young girl wearing a white dress named Lily. According to Thought Catalog's Jerome London, it's believed Lily was born at the asylum and grew up there, tragically dying at the age of 9. Her ghost plays in the children's ward, laughing, rolling balls along the floor, and playing a music box. During my return trip to the asylum, our guide took us to the attic, which had been converted from visitor house into patient rooms to ease overcrowding. Well, it looked very different the last time I was there. At the end of a row of identical rooms, there was a room with a closet in which our guide invited 3 guests to sit for a few minutes. Anyone brave enough to sit in the dark closet experienced a strange sense of calm and noticed a rapid passage of time, he explained. One after another, 3 ladies sat in the closet, and all 3 reported the phenomenon to one degree or another. Whether this was due to something paranormal or the effects of being in a dark, confined space is debatable. Whether or not you believe the numerous reports of paranormal activity at Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, the opportunity to explore the history, architecture, and artifacts of the building is well worth the drive. When it was in operation, access to the public was severely restricted, but now you are free to roam its corridors for a small fee. Who knows what you might discover hiding in the shadows? From aristocratic colonial manor to dilapidated squatter's nest to historic landmark, Carlyle House has survived centuries, but eyewitnesses claim something otherworldly has survived with it. A colonial era ruin uncovered after decades hidden behind an antebellum hotel should be enough to ignite storytellers' imaginations, but it's reports of numerous apparitions that make Carlyle House in Alexandria, Virginia, a mandatory stop on any local ghost tour. Built by Scottish merchant John Carlyle on premier lots along the Potomac River from 1751 to 1753, this mid-Georgian stone manor is older than our country. History was made in its parlor. John Carlyle began his career as an apprentice to an English merchant, but soon made his own fortune in the British colonies. In 1747, he married Sarah Fairfax, daughter of William Fairfax, who was a cousin to the largest landowner in Virginia. She was a charming young woman who died before her time. Carlyle himself became quite wealthy, with 3 plantations, dozens of slaves, and several business interests. In the French and Indian War, British General Edward Braddock used Carlyle House as his headquarters before he embarked on his ill-fated campaign into Weston, Pennsylvania. During a conference with colonial governors at the house, Braddock and the governors got into a spat over funds, an early source of tension that later led to the Revolutionary War. John and Sarah Carlyle had 7 children, 5 of whom died in adolescence. John and his second wife, Sybil, had 4 children. Only one of John's 11 children lived to adulthood. A furniture merchant named James Green purchased Carlyle's former manor and adjacent bank in 1848, which he turned into the Mansion House Hotel. Green expanded the hotel along Fairfax Street, and Carlyle's stone manor disappeared from public view. During the American Civil War, occupying Union forces turned the Mansion House Hotel into a hospital, which was later depicted in PBS's miniseries Mercy Street. After the war, the hotel became an apartment building, and Carlyle House deteriorated to the point where it was at risk of collapse. It was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1969, and in 1970, Nova Parks acquired the property and began a 6-year effort to restore the house to its former glory. During restoration, workers discovered the mummified body of a cat sealed inside the foundation, an old British custom thought to bring good luck. But that wasn't the only unusual thing visitors noticed about the house. According to author J.J. Smith, of all persons to die in Carlyle's home, his second wife, Sybil West, is believed to haunt the drafty rooms. An old folktale invites local girls named Sarah to knock on the door and yell, "Sarah, come outside." It's believed Sybil was jealous of Carlyle's first wife, Sarah Fairfax, and went to the extreme of burning Sarah's possessions. Some visitors have reported seeing a woman's apparition screaming in the garden behind the house. Carlyle House's most famous ghosts date from the time of Green's Mansion House or the Braddock House Hotel. Though the building is gone, many report seeing phantoms of 3 unlucky men who died falling from the hotel. One Union soldier, convalescing after the Battle of Fredericksburg in December 1862, jumped from a window in a feverish hallucination of being chased. Another man, Samuel Markle, fell to his death in 1905, and a third, 20-year-old Pat Buckley, fell in 1912. Author Michael E. Pope insists the house itself is free from ghosts, but its front lawn is home to a trio of specters belonging to these unfortunate men. Tourists snap anomalous photos in the evening and report feeling their clothes tugged or a disembodied hand on their shoulder. Whether or not the Carlyle House and its environs is truly haunted is up for debate, but there's no debating whether it's worth visiting this historic site to find out. Carlyle House Historic Park at 121 North Fairfax Street in Alexandria, Virginia, is open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., and Sunday, 12 p.m. to 4 p.m., closed on Mondays and major holidays. The sinister reputation of haunted places are often unearned, but in the case of this remote Virginia bridge, the truth is more horrifying than fiction. A remote road in York County in Virginia's historic triangle holds secrets, or at least that's what storytellers say. Otherworldly phenomena is responsible for events ranging from electronic disturbances to car accidents, and real-life murders have darkened the spot's already sinister reputation. Bad vibes and negative energy make some locals steer clear. The object of morbid fascination is a concrete bridge built in the 1930s, where Tour Road passes over Crawford Road in the woods north of Newport News Park, south of Yorktown Battlefield, where George Washington defeated Lord Cornwallis in 1781. Crawford Road bypasses Yorktown Road between I-64 and U.S. Route 17, but there's not much to see aside from occasional wildlife. This remote patch of wilderness lends itself to unusual stories. The most popular legend involves a young bride forced into a loveless marriage. Rather than spend the rest of her life with a man she loathes, the woman hanged herself from the Tour Road overpass. Since then, a ghostly woman in white can be seen standing on the bridge, only to reenact her sickening plunge. Cars swerve to avoid a lone specter in the road or experience engine trouble while driving through the narrow tunnel. Others swear the Ku Klux Klan holds secret meetings nearby and that there have been lynchings at the bridge, though there is no evidence for these outlandish tales. An abandoned house populated by glowing red eyes and disembodied whispers awaits anyone who ventures into the woods. But you'd have to be crazier than a sprayed roach. Virginia folklorist L.B. Taylor Jr., who has collected hundreds of ghost stories, is skeptical. "I think it's more of an urban legend than an actual haunting," he told the Daily Press in 2013. "I think it's teenagers that have wild imaginations. They just go down there half scared to start with." A graffiti-covered bridge, stories of a satanic house, and rumors of lynching reminds me of the legendary Seven Gates to Hell of Crawford County, Illinois. Isolated bridges frequently attract local folk tales, and story elements often migrate across state lines. The Lady in White is an old folk tale that dates back centuries and can be found in numerous countries, usually involving the ghost of a young woman who died tragically. The Tour Road overpass over Crawford Road has been the backdrop for both imaginary and real-life horror. Over the past few decades alone, 4 bodies have been found along Crawford Road and 2 in the woods nearby. The remote and sparsely populated location is unfortunately attractive to the criminally inclined. In 1990, James Jimmy Johnson's body was found in the woods, handcuffed and shot execution style. More unrelated murders occurred in 1996, 2000, and most recently 2016. In March 2018, 22-year-old Julian Rios pled guilty to the July 2016 first-degree murder of 19-year-old Austin Baxley. Baxley's body was found not far from the Crawford Road Bridge. "We used to tell people that if they kept hanging around down there, they'd become a ghost," York County historian and former deputy sheriff Frank Green told the Williamsburg Yorktown Daily. While none of the specific ghost stories of Crawford Road Bridge seem to be based in reality, it has justifiably earned a reputation for the macabre. Visitors' hairs stand on end, cognizant of the violent events that took place just a few dozen yards away. This is one place legend trippers should avoid. Crawford Road Bridge is located along Crawford Road, north of Baptist Run. Historical Tour Road crosses over Crawford Road at this point. The bridge is 2.6 miles southwest of Yorktown and 1.4 miles north of Washington's headquarters at Yorktown. There is no parking, not even a gravel pull-off, so park at your own risk. An old Civil War prison camp is enough to fuel ghost stories, but several long-abandoned structures also contribute to this mysterious urban isle. It's not often local folklore and urban exploration collide at a city park, but Belle Isle in Richmond, Virginia has a lot to offer curious visitors. Picturesque bike paths and hiking trails past long-abandoned structures fuel visitors' imaginations, and stories of wandering ghosts in blue have been shared for decades. Is there any truth to these tales? Traces of human activity on Belle Isle date back hundreds of years, starting with American Indians who found the island in the James River ideal for fishing. Captain John Smith explored it in 1607, and locals called it Broad Rock Island. Following in his footsteps, the area's first white settlers carried on the Indians' activities by building a fishery. Other industries soon followed with an iron and nail factory in 1814 and a granite quarry. By the 1860s, this industry had attracted a small community, but their idyllic life was interrupted by war. When Virginia seceded in 1861, the Confederate government found Belle Isle an ideal place for a prisoner of war camp. Russian water on all sides discouraged escape, as did the artillery pieces pointed at the camp. As many as 30,000 Yankee prisoners of war were held there between 1862 and 1865, peaking at 10,000 in 1863, with tents for only a third of the population. Conditions were horrible. The Confederacy could barely care for men in its own armies, let alone its numerous prison camps. Disease, starvation, and exposure took a toll, and as many as 1,000 prisoners died on the island. Today, the burial place of these unfortunate souls is crudely marked. In the 20th century, the Virginia Electric Power Company operated a hydroelectric power plant on Belle Isle. The ruins of the power plant and the nail factory can still be seen to this day. Filmmakers deemed the empty cement structure sufficiently creepy to form a backdrop for one scene in a motion picture called Hannibal. The city of Richmond opened Belle Isle as a public park in 1973, building hiking trails, bicycle paths, and placing interpretive signs explaining the history of the island. It was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1995. Since opening to the public, visitors have described strange encounters with phenomena ranging from disembodied voices to twinkling lights and anomalous photographs. Many attribute this activity to the ghosts of Yankee prisoners of war, but orbs, voices, and shadowy figures have also been seen around the remains of the hydroelectric plant. Other visitors report being hit by small stones thrown by unseen hands. According to Beth Brown, author of Haunted Battlefields, Virginia's Civil War Ghosts, one hiker heard disembodied footsteps behind him when he was alone on the trail. Brown herself reportedly encountered moving cold spots around the old nail factory and claimed to record a voice asking, "Where are we?" I continue to hear about experiences with shadow people there and mysterious lights in the woods at night, sometimes 2 or 3 stories a week, she concluded. These tales, grounded in a tragic history, add an air of mystery to what would otherwise be a tranquil and picturesque city park. Belle Isle is located in the James River in downtown Richmond, Virginia. There are 2 pedestrian access points, the Belle Island Suspension Bridge on the north side of the island, off Tredegar Street and Browns Island Way, and an entrance off Buttermilk Trail at Riverside Drive and West 21st Street. There is a parking lot off Riverside Drive west of 22nd Street. The island is open dawn to dusk. Edgar Allan Poe left his mark across the mid-Atlantic region, from Richmond, Virginia to Baltimore, Maryland, and Newark, Delaware. Today, you can follow in the footsteps of this dark romantic poet and storyteller, but be warned, you just might disturb his ghost. 19th century writer Edgar Allan Poe is best known for poems like The Raven and Annabel Lee, and short stories like The Fall of the House of Usher and The Telltale Heart. Poe's birth parents were actors who died when he was a child. He was raised by foster parents in Richmond, Virginia, and attended the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, where you can still see what is traditionally regarded as his dorm room. He moved to Baltimore, Maryland as a young man, where he stayed at the home of his widowed aunt, Maria Clem, and met his future wife, the young Virginia Eliza Clem. Their narrow red brick duplex stood at number 3 Amethyst Street. Today, it is the Edgar Allan Poe House and Museum. Poe lived in this house with the Clems for approximately 1 year before attending West Point. After his dismissal from West Point in 1831, he returned to Baltimore and stayed with his aunt and her family until 1835. During his stay in Baltimore, Poe penned some of his lesser-known short stories and poems, including The Visionary and Serenade. Later that year, after moving to Richmond to work for the Southern Literary Messenger, 26-year-old Poe married his 13-year-old cousin, Virginia. Sadly, she died of tuberculosis at the age of 24. On December 23, 1843, Poe gave a lecture at the Newark Academy in Newark, Delaware, and spent the night at St. Patrick's Inn, which is today called the Deer Park Tavern. According to legend, upon returning to the inn, he tripped while exiting his carriage and fell in the mud. "A curse upon this place," he said. "All who enter shall have to return." Onlookers were so amused they carried him inside. Later, it was said Poe either wrote or was inspired to write his famous poem, The Raven, while staying there. Poe spent another week lecturing on poetry at Newark Academy in 1849, shortly before his death. Poe's tragic life has been recounted elsewhere, but to make a long story short, he died nearly penniless in a delirium on October 7, 1849, at the age of 40. He was buried in an unmarked grave in the Westminster Presbyterian Church Cemetery in Baltimore. His fans raised funds, and architect George A. Frederick designed a monument for Poe in 1871, and it was dedicated in 1875. Poe was exhumed and reburied near the front of the churchyard. In 1913, a man named Orrin C. Painter placed another stone marking Poe's original burial site. In 1906, Poe fans formed the Poe Memorial Association. They salvaged bricks from the demolished Southern Literary Messenger building to erect a shrine to Poe behind Richmond, Virginia's oldest house at 1914 East Main Street, which was then a museum dedicated to colonial history. The shrine opened in 1922. Today, the oldest house in Richmond, as well as several adjacent buildings, house a collection of artifacts from Poe's life, including his worldly possessions at death, his cane, vest, and even a lock of his hair. One building devoted to his childhood even contains his childhood bed. It's an impressive assortment. There is even a reading library. A gift shop takes up much of the old house, where visitors can express their love of Poe by buying Poe coffee mugs, books, postcards, and even votive candles. Visitors advance from one small building to another, each devoted to a period in the author's life. There is a diverse variety of artifacts, sculpture, and art on display. Two black cats named Edgar and Pluto wander the museum grounds and sun themselves on the pavement in the garden. They are friendly, accustomed to attention from visitors. Thankfully, they'll escape the same fate as poor Pluto from Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Black Cat. The Roman cats are a part of the museum's charm, as are events like the periodic Unhappy Hour. Regular public readings and book talks help foster a real sense of community among Poe admirers in the Richmond area. These locations are a must-see for any fan of Poe's work, where something of his spirit still lingers. After more than 200 years, the mystery of the female stranger continues to fascinate visitors to this Alexandria, Virginia landmark. Some say her ghost never left. Alexandria is an old town filled with historic buildings, populated by ghosts and legends. No less than 49 sites in Alexandria are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Perhaps the most legendary is Gadsby's Tavern at the corner of Cameron and Royal Streets. Its mysterious tale of the female stranger has confounded local historians and folklorists for over 200 years. In the late 1700s, Alexandria was the social center of Northern Virginia. Charles and Ann Mason first recognized the potential for a tavern and opened a business at the corner of Royal and Cameron Streets. With the end of the Revolutionary War, an entrepreneur named John Wise built a new tavern in 1785 and a hotel in 1792, red brick buildings which still exist to this day. John Gadsby leased and operated the establishments from 1796 to 1808, when Alexandria became part of the new federal district of Washington, D.C. In those early years, Gadsby's Tavern hosted travelers from all over the colonies, including prominent men like George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, and the Marquis de Lafayette. It was considered a premier establishment, hosting parties and balls in its large hall. You should have seen the elegant gowns and costumes with frills and feathers, but that was a long time ago. It was during this heyday when the legend of the mysterious female stranger took root. In the fall of 1816, a husband and wife disembarked from a ship in Alexandria Harbor and checked into the city hotel attached to Gadsby's Tavern. Neither gave a name. The man's wife was seriously ill and died after a few days. Her grieving husband commissioned a table-like tombstone that read, "To the memory of a female stranger. This stone is placed here by her disconsolate husband, in whose arms she sighed out her last breath, and who under God did his utmost even to soothe the cold dead ear of death." He then vanished from history. You've heard plenty of stories, ladies and gentlemen, but here are the facts. We know an anonymous young woman, 23 years old, died of typhoid fever in the City Hotel on October 14, 1816. She was buried in St. Paul's Cemetery in Alexandria. Much of her story has been lost in the mists of time, mostly legend with a kernel of truth. Efforts to determine her name and origin have been highly speculative. William F. Kahn published an account of her life in 1883, as did Charles T. Johnson, Jr. in 1912. Both accounts are wildly different, but share the common thread of forbidden love. Some say she was the daughter of Aaron Burr. Others that she was an orphan who accidentally married her own brother. Still others say she was taken to America by her employer, who jealously shot and killed her lover. Since no one knows who she was, readers fill in the blanks with whatever story they like best. By the 20th century, Gadsby's Tavern, now known as the City Hotel and Tavern, was selling elements from its historic interior to stay afloat. The Metropolitan Museum of Art purchased its ballroom, including the mantelpiece and door frames, and reassembled it in New York City. Shops occupied the ground floor, and the building slowly deteriorated. In the 1930s, a man named F. Clinton Knight worked with the American Legion to preserve the historic tavern and hotel and restore it to its 18th century appearance. It was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1963 and added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1966. The 1970s saw a renewed interest in local government taking an active role in preserving buildings from Alexandria's past. Gadsby's Tavern Museum, owned and operated by the City of Alexandria, with support from Gadsby's Tavern Museum Society, was born. Since opening to the public, visitors have reported encounters with the ghost of the female stranger. According to L.B. Taylor, Jr., author of The Ghost of Virginia, passers-by have witnessed her standing in a bedroom window holding a candle. Another patron followed her spectral form from the ballroom to her former bedroom, where she vanished. The museum has restored her room to its early 19th century appearance. Perhaps this is why she lingers. Gadsby's Tavern Museum at 134 North Royal Street in Alexandria, Virginia, is open seasonally. Self-guided tours are available anytime, but guided tours are offered at select times. You'll find St. Paul's Cemetery at the end of Hamilton Avenue in Alexandria, Virginia. Once again, this is Morella Bell, and you're listening to the Secret Virginia podcast. Y'all sleep tight.